Hi, I'm Barry Vorster, and I'm very happy to be with all of you today. Hopefully, we can talk a little bit about an intersection in and amongst several aspects that truly influence the way we work and will work into the future. It really is about an intersection between the overwhelming amount of digital adoption we are doing, to think through which aspects of culture and authenticity can we lift out, but also ultimately thinking about how that influences our experience of ourselves and our organizations, and how we bring ourselves to work, and ultimately how we help organizations to be productive. In an era where things are changing this fast, and we've seen that with the likes of ChatGPT and the amazing exponential growth in usage faster than anything else in history, it really is about a world in which post-COVID, we're not only talking about HR technology, but technologies that are intertwined and interwoven within and the work we do. And ultimately, looking at a way in which organizations might even organize themselves differently, algocratically, with algorithms who help us best decide which people in which groupings could best accomplish which tasks and which objectives. In an age when more of what we do will definitely be automated, so taken away from us, or more importantly, augmented with technology, whether that's AI, whether that's portions of machine learning, or even forms of robotics. And this all happening in a future of work and a future of jobs in this era where we have an exponential change in the way we think of ourselves and the technologies that augment us. But it's also in a time when our traditional thinking of how organizations are structured is changing. And whereas previously we really thought about the core of the organization being the employees, I mean, we're moving to an era where there is a core, and the core might actually be the people in your call center, or some of the core people servicing your clients, and then supported by people who provide additive services. Could be your legal department, could be marketing, and those could be services that you're contracting in as and when you require them. Ultimately, those services and other services to augment what you do down to contracting. But not thinking of these various groups as being separate from your organization, all of them being part of your thinking in terms of skills, in terms of health and safety, in terms of motivating a workforce to help you achieve your goals. And in all of those cases, it's important to think of this continuum of people being part and parcel of your organization. But it has real implications in how we think about the people, and not thinking about people being conscripted to your organization, but being there as volunteers. So in this era of change, I think there are a few themes and forces really changing the way we work, and the way we interact with one another in the workplace. One key one, and I've been watching the Rugby World Cup, is just to look at the number of people from various countries now playing for other countries and other teams. And I think that's indicative of a world in which we are not only bound by the country or by an organization, and we should see higher levels of mobility. A real movement away from thinking about people in terms of a job and a title, to thinking about skills as being the key currency of people and organizations. Higher levels of digital adoption, which we'll talk about a little bit later, an increase in the need for people who show up authentically as leaders, deeper thought, less superficial about what well-being is really like, and ultimately rethinking what the workplace is and means for all of us. Let's start a little bit with well-being. In 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 this world that we are living in well-being isn't a perhaps and sometimes choice. It is something which is key to the way we think about all of our employees. And if you look at the statistics or just the picture on your screen, 75%, 75 out of 100, so 75% of employees require some kind of support to just foster a mental wellness, whereas 24 require real and deeper support, and have needs from counseling to psychotherapy, with at least one in the 100 requiring real mental wellness support for their own acute needs. And this just brings us to the fact that it's not a choice, but it is now embedded, because we know if we are able to support people from a well-being perspective, we can have a more productive, hopefully happier, and sound workforce that experiences themselves and the workplace very differently. But that brings me to the next point. I think post-COVID, we're still really struggling with whether we should be going back to work or not, and what that means, and what do we do when we are in a physical space with one another. And I thought, just facetiously to a point, just look at some of the McKinsey research around what management would want and what employees want. And if we look pre-pandemic, management wanted and believed that the primary place of work should be, 92% of them indicated that they probably think four days plus would be a reasonable amount of time that people would spend at work. If you look at it still, the indication is that at least 2 to 4 days is in excess of 80%. But if you look at what employees would want and their preferences, they probably want a flexible work model in which in excess of 50% of their time is split in some kind of hybrid fashion, with a little bit on fully remote, and a little bit at the office, but probably more related to being able to make a choice dependent on their life requirements. And so if we think about the first piece on wellness, allowing people the freedom to make those choices, but also supporting them therein. And the question then is if people do want a hybrid workplace, what do they want in addition? And it's really interesting. People not only want to be able to make those choices, but on the other hand, and perhaps a little bit counterintuitively, also want to be within organizations that are driven by a purpose to which they can attach themselves. Not only that, they want to be able to attach themselves to a purpose, but also work with fellow co-workers who are people they'd like to surround themselves with. And ultimately, and most importantly, also be in an organization where they will be rewarded and respected for the work they do. Not only remunerated, but I think most importantly, recognized and respected. And this is in a work where people will not only be known for their titles or their occupations, but really we're moving into a stage where jobs will change, and where we'll probably have, as John Boudreau indicates in his book, work without jobs, really thinking about a new operating system in which we elevate skill and capability above the title and the occupation as such. As Alan Jope indicates, jobs should be made redundant, but not people. But that also requires an intense focus on reskilling and upskilling our workforces. In that world, and as we start accelerating the adoption of more digital technologies, I think it's always a good thing to also think about the amount of money that we spend, the investments we are making, and how successful we are in doing so, and what the efficacy thereof is. So if you think about it, we've just said we have this new world where skills are important, but where do we need to build the skills? If you look at what we're spending on digital adoption, estimations by the likes of Udacity is that it's in the region of $6.8 trillion by 2024. But much of that will be wasted, and it will be wasted because people do not have the skills to fully utilize the technology that they have at hand. And I think therein lies some of what we need to give attention to. So we know that 40% of workers will require reskilling in the next 6 months or less. And we know that management and the leaders in our organizations expect people to pick up some of those skills and do so quickly. And some of those skills could be not only technical skills, but critical thinking, problem solving, the ability to learn, the ability to show grit in the face of adversity, the ability to be flexible. And in building that, I think we need to start thinking about what and where all of that fits in terms of the various digital disruptions and changes we've seen. I think originally, when we were in the early 2000s, it was really about an adaptation and an adoption of small tools, so digital tools that we used for websites or apps and communication and CRM. And you saw that especially in commerce and in some areas, so the likes of Walmart or Amazon.com, and in retail. And really, we've seen a piece around transformation, which is about the consumption of many more things, whether that's Uber or Netflix or Spotify, and then a disruption in the way that we've perceived things to work. So telemedicine or Disney Plus. But really, we're going into a new phase into which there could be complete disruption in the way we think about a value chain. So in terms of online pharmacies, or using the use of Bitcoin, but not only using blockchain for Bitcoin, but also using it for blockchaining credentials and medical records, and making sure that people have ownership of those. And in these, trying to think through which skills people need to have to be able not only work within these environments, but to be very productive and being able to truly add value. That also says something about what HR needs to do. And HR often thinks about the processes and the things they need to do, and the peoples and the systems. And I would broadly refer to that as the HR strategy and drives. But not only do they need to do that, but they also need to make sure that they bring together both the workforce and the workplace into an overarching people strategy. And what does that mean? I would want to put at the center of that strategy a focus on and a renewed thinking of what it is to create an experience. And we've spoken about this. We've spoken about the factors like culture. We've spoken about the importance of learning in the fast-changing world. We've quickly looked at well-being. But thinking of experience not as superficial, but truly bringing together all of those aspects. And a colleague of mine and I worked on a formula around this, and saying that employee experience is a combination, a multiplication of organizations that have a positive culture, that is attentive to people well-being, multiplied by organizations where learning and learning agility is at the forefront of what the organization is about. And let's think a little bit about this. On the one hand, we know that experience is important, but probably we've underestimated the full importance. And if we think about what the goal is of experience, it is not superficial, but it is helping people to do their best and be their best. And in doing so, the outflow is a 5 times increase in people's sense of belonging, their ability to engage with the organization, and the organization being able to retain them, an ability to adapt, but ultimately an ability to innovate effectively, and therefore enabling us to be part and parcel of the organization in a deeper fashion than we could before. And as we talk about the positive culture as being part and parcel of the experience, it's not a simple matter. It's not a question of just making superficial changes. It is truly tapping into the culture of an organization, doing that in a fashion to be able to support, but also accelerate transformation. And I think most importantly, trying to understand that it is not only trying to think in new ways, but it is doing it in a way where we start changing behavior, in the way where it's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than thinking your way into a new way of acting. Let me say that again. It's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than thinking your way into a new way of acting. Meaning that it is important for organizations to start embedding those new habits and actions as an accelerator for more new habits and actions. When we think about this and we think about how we need to think about experience, and we've spoken about it in terms of culture, in terms of learning, and in terms of well-being, it's also important to think of the metrics that we'll start using to measure this, and do this not only at a superficial level, but at a deeper level. And one sees some of that happening within some of the measurements, the World Economic Forum, and some of the measuring stakeholder capitalism and finding common metrics. But I think what we're trying to do is to understand which of those metrics are truly contributing to fairer and more authentic workplaces in which people can thrive. Thrive in such a way that we also understand what the future could look like, being able to plan for that from an overall skills point of view, and helping our employees build those skills from an overall learning agility point of view. To the point that we're not only able to talk about this, but on the flip side, also being able to produce deeper information for our organizations to understand the investment in people in a way similar to financial statements, having a total workforce statement that tells us what the value of our people are, that tells us how much we've contributed, that tells us how people are experiencing our organizations, to the point that that is as important as the financial statements looked at by stakeholders, by shareholders, and overseen by the board. Ultimately, and I'd like to quote Brené Brown on this, we really have this movement from muscles. So the 1800s and the 1900s, the industrial age, which was an era of muscle, where it was about strength and physical stamina, moving into the era of brains, which is about analytics and raw intelligence, but really moving to an era of heart. An era which is about our experience and our ability to focus on and work with people, and understanding the wisdom, the empathy, and the heart that underlies what we do with and for each other. Thank you very much for myself. Hope you have a lovely day, and hope we connect soon.